questioning is perhaps the greatest gift we have as human beings.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking that teaches us to question everything we think we know.
Science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world.
We have at our fingertips the technologies that were only possible for the largest governments and corporations 20 years ago as an individual today.
If human civilization continued at anything remotely like the current pace of technology advancement for 1 million years, where would we be? I think we're either extinct or on a lot of planets.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it.
We hold the scientific method in high regard because it works. If it stopped working, we'd throw it out.
Discover the past.
Create the future.
This is the Here and How podcast.
Welcome to the Here and How podcast, where every week we dive deep into big ideas to explore the past so we can create a brighter future. This is episode 18, What is Happiness? My name is Rachel Oates, and with me are the wonderful Stephen Woodford.
Hello.
And Thomas Westbrook.
Yo.
So, guys, what is happiness?
Not taxes.
Not cancer.
Both accurate. Okay, so that's what happiness isn't. What?
Yeah.
What do you think happiness is?
Dopamine.
Dopamine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chemical reactions in our brain that make us feel mushy and happy. And I know you're not supposed to use the same word in the definition of the thing that you're trying to define.
Happiness is happy, but like a feeling of it.
Well, kind of. It's like if happiness is happy, but then what is happiness? And I get you could say being content, being comfortable with your environment and your life at that time and situation.
Are we talking about like long-term like joy, or are we talking about like kind of a temporary state of euphoria?
Okay, so this is actually like a really, really good point, which is what I was going to come into straight away. And when we talk about happy, there are like a lot of different kind of, I guess you could say like definitions or interpretations of it. So you have happiness as just kind of like a happy feeling in the moment, which, as you guys say, is kind of down to dopamine. And I guess some people would call that joy. You also have just like a satisfaction with life, a general sense of well-being. There's just kind of a cheerful demeanor at times. So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of talk about happiness. But today we're going to be talking about it in a kind of more general, long-term sort of sense, and how people can lead a happy life, and how do we have a happy life, basically, and kind of look back at the history of the study of happiness, because it goes all the way back to Aristotle and the ancient Greeks, and more recently there's been a lot more of like in-depth research into it, and I think it should be quite an interesting topic if you guys are up for it.
If we say no, episode's over.
Yeah, pretty much. Don't let me down, guys. I just so much work.
I was just going to ask, actually, about. I was going to ask, am I wrong in thinking that the Greeks were really asking this question, and then it kind of died out for ages, and then has only relatively recently come back up?
Actually, yeah.
In the West, at least.
Yeah, so when I started doing research, I found out that kind of before the ancient Greeks, basically people thought that happiness was this really rare thing that was basically only reserved for the gods themselves and the people they favoured. There was nothing we could do to make ourselves happy. It was all about what the gods bestowed on us. And then people like Socrates and Aristotle and who's the other guy?
Marcus Aurelius.
Well, I was going to say Epicurus, but yeah, probably him as well.
I was thinking like with the schools of Stoicism, etc.
Yeah. And basically these guys came along and they were some of the first people to say, no, hang on, I think people can be in control of their own happiness and their own decisions and their own life, and people can make themselves happy, and not in that way, but in a general sense. You know what I mean?
Didn't the Greeks they believed in like you could attain a state of like eudaimonia or something, and it was like doing and living well, and yes, I know that word.
Yeah, I think there was so many different conflicting schools in the ancient Greeks.
It was like an Aristotelian notion, but you see that a lot. This state of, with the Greeks, they're looking at this, contemplating these higher, ideas of, can we become happy? How can we attain? What is the purpose of life and the meaning of life? And is happiness even a good thing? Oftentimes we look in the West, we look at happiness as kind of this end all be all, I want to be happy. But oftentimes contentment in other cultures isn't necessarily seen as the end game. It's like, well, life is miserable. You eat shit and then you die. And so it's like, well, what can we do? What is the purpose of life? That's, if it's not happiness. But that may be a topic for a whole different episode.
I can fit in.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something we can discuss. Definitely. But going back to the point that I was going to make is that like the ancient Greeks had like a lot of study in this, and then there was kind of a big gap until like the 1600s, and then another big gap until the kind of like 80s, 90s, and now when it's kind of come back and there's this whole idea of like positive psychology, which is like a whole new area of psychology that a lot of work has been done into, and we're going to be looking at later in the episode.
That's great.
But for now, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of like, what is happiness and what does it mean to lead a happy life and to be a happy person and things like that. And I have a couple of little definitions for you that some people have put forward, and I'm going to kind of read them out and thought we could discuss them and see what you guys think.
So I haven't done much research for this episode.
That's okay.
Could I give you what my definition is? Because it'd be interesting whether otherwise I'm going to look like I'm nicking someone.
No, that's okay.
But I've heard definitions where happiness is having as much pleasure as possible, whereas I kind of frame it in the opposite. I think it's the avoidance of fear and pain. So the more you avoid fear and pain, the more happy you are. I kind of see that as the a priori rather than the other way around.
That is very close to a definition by two scientists called Ryan and Deci in 2001. They said happiness is the presence of positive emotions and absence of negative emotions. So they made it very clear that it's like a mix of both like the positive and lack of negative. So it's not just this kind of middle line floating along with everything. You need, a bit of both. So that's a little bit similar to what you're getting at, I think.
I would say that happiness is, a hot cup of coffee and a beautiful sunrise with crisp air. Like it's a feeling of contentment of
I don't like coffee.
of peace, of not feeling stressed out or worried or depressed, but just feeling like all is well with the world. And it might arise from a whole swath of different possibilities of different, whether it's helping others, whether it's doing something, whether it's feeling like you've accomplished something that would be remembered, but feeling a certain amount of pride in your work and contentment with your life. I know that's a weird way of putting it, but
no, that's really good. There's a couple of things I want to pick up on there. And one of them is that you said it was a feeling of all being well in the world, and that's something we're going to come back to in a minute. And the other one is how you said a hot cup of coffee, and Stephen immediately went, oh no, I don't like coffee. And I think that says a lot about how this idea of happiness and how we achieve happiness and what happiness means is a very personal thing, and there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
And funnily enough... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can imagine there's trends. Like, I suppose there's not many people that really enjoy involuntary pain. But you are going to get differences between chocolate ice cream and vanilla.
Yeah. But also just about kind of like the path to finding happiness in terms of like, so it might be easy to say, oh, to be happy, you need to do what you love. But doing what you love is going to be very different for different people. So,
and a very hard question, right?
Exactly.
That changes.
Exactly. So one of the first people I found to actually write about this in a lot of detail wasn't actually until Paul Dolan in 2014, when he wrote the book Happiness by Design, which is a great book, and it's all about finding happiness and finding pleasure and finding purpose in your life. And it's a very, very good book about happiness. But he was one of the first people to really talk about how happiness is a very personal thing. And I find it very weird that in 1,500 years or something, we didn't really start thinking about this too much up until now. If that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does make sense.
It makes sense to me in light of the living circumstances of like the Dark Ages, if you will, or the Middle Ages. You look at societies where you're kind of living in your own feces, and there's rats that are spreading disease and plague on fleas, and there's bed bugs, and you don't really have a whole lot of say. So if you were to tell someone then that like, oh, hey, the purpose of life is to be happy, well, then everyone's going to be like depressed and like, this is awful. We can't achieve our purpose because like, it's life is miserable. Life is, horrible unless you're the couple, kings and queens and princes and whatnot at the very top, unless you're absolute royalty. Even then, our standard of living today is so much better than what they had. We've got air conditioning and refrigerators and cars and all this stuff. And, it doesn't smell like a toilet when you walk outside most places that are civilized.
Speak for your own home. I live in London, come on.
But you contrast that with today, and it's like, if this notion of happiness, like you can be content in any circumstance. Like happiness is a state of mind. But at the same time, like if in those situations, like society runs a lot smoother when you tell them, your purpose is to just put your head down and do your duty in life and duty and serve the king who is divinely appointed and, serve God. And like, then you'll have this eternal reward in the afterlife or something. But, that's not your purpose in this life to be happy. Like that comes later. If you're a good little pawn, a good little ant, a cog in the machine.
Yeah. I think just from my perspective, it's more, we haven't evolved to be happy. We've evolved to reproduce. And so it doesn't surprise me that we're only now, we have still quite an infant perspective on happiness and how to attain it and what exactly it is. So to me, it's not surprising that it took such a long time for people to really start considering what is it and how does it work. So
that actually reminds me of some stuff that Dolan said and another psychologist called Martin Seligman, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who basically said that if you look at, say, animals, for example, they achieve this kind of happiness or contentment in their life by just going about their business as they do. They eat, they sleep, they reproduce, that's it. And I guess you could say that's happiness for them. But
are we sure?
Well, I'm not sure if it's technically happiness, but that's kind of...
I see.
You can measure their stress levels.
Yeah.
But have we really, for example, if some humans are very, very good at hiding when they're not okay, they're really depressed, but for all intent and purposes, they look very functional, they're very fine. And it could come down to the fact that they're not eating the right nutrients, or they're just depressed because of family matters that they're not, they don't have on display. It could be anything. It could just be the way in which their mind is, the way in which they function with society. It stands to reason that animals who cannot rationalize to the extent that we can are more at mercy of their feelings, of these arbitrary things that define whether or not they're happy or not. The only reason I ask is because it's very easy to look at a cat and go, the cat's happy. He might be depressed.
Yeah.
Well, but you can hide it externally. You can't internally. So you can measure scientifically. You can measure, people's cortisol levels, their adrenaline levels, their glucocorticoids. You can take, all these measurements of, their hormones, their heart rate, their health, and see in these circumstances where, enough people who self-identify as, I'm stressed out, and all these hormone levels are through the roof. And
so first of all, we have the human saying, I'm stressed out. So we know that we can correlate those fluctuations of whatever hormones or emotions or whatever it is.
Not just correlations. You can find causal links by, like, if you show them images that are extremely, stressful, violent, graphic images, you can see these levels spike. And you can measure their galvanic skin response too, and you can see a spike. And if you do this consistently enough, like the results are, it's a smoking gun that these hormones do increase your heart rate and cause your pupils to dilate and cause your all this stuff to you start freaking out. You get in this fight or flight response, and sometimes there's long-term stressors that can be extremely unhealthy in the long term. And you can measure this against someone who's in a state of like meditation or in a state of, peacefulness and calm tranquility, and put them in really peaceful environments and measure this as well.
So I'm fully aware that we can do it with humans.
Well, animals,
that they've done it with animals.
Animals have the same hormones, or a lot of them have the same hormones. And, it's going to be different, obviously, with like a fly.
But hormones function in a different way depending on the species, right? It's not like the way in which testosterone works for humans is exactly how it functions in even a rat. There is slight differences with the way in which that works, which is why it's notorious to use rats for study. Because
if you start banging on a rat's cage and you see its eyes like get huge and it starts freaking out and running for its life.
Oh yeah.
Then you can tell that this creature's traumatized, and if you do something like this consistently enough, then you'll develop a species of rat that's not a species of rat. That's a poor way of putting it, but you'll develop a rat that is, over the course of its life, it has received so much trauma that they tend to die prematurely from stress. They tend to have all kinds of health issues, and so you can measure all the levels of these hormones in these animals.
So my concern isn't the physicality of that point. Like, you can tell when a dog's stressed, when it's it fears its owner because it feels it's like it's going to get hit or something like that. This. Going back to what Rachel was saying earlier about the outlook and how it's a mentality thing. We know that people can have very, very harsh lives and yet they're happy, and it's because of something to do with the way in which they process things, the way in which they look at the world. For example, I would say that I'm a happy person largely because I, at least to a large extent, subscribe to Stoicism. When it comes to animals, it could be one's in a bad state or in a state where it's not, optimum for their health, and yet they're very happy. Not because of a mentality, but it could be many, many things. Whereas some could be getting everything they want and give you completely the signs that they're fine, but because they're artificially bred even, it could be anything, they are very, very depressed. Unless we do studies, and I'd have to see them. I don't buy the fact that we would just pick up a dog and study it for no reason. Basically, getting down to that level of, it's very hard to tell when a human is dealing with psychological stress. So, and I know you can. I'm not disputing that. But the idea that we can understand animals to that extent, to me, just seems a little bit. I'm incredulous. Put it that way.
Well, I don't want to get kind of like too off topic here and talk about animals too much, if that's okay. But the point I was going to make is that one of the big arguments is that what separates us from animals is that we strive to have like a sense of purpose, and that's one of the things that kind of contributes to our happiness. So happiness isn't just a mood, it's not just getting what you want, but it's having a sense of purpose in the world, and without that we can't really experience happiness, apparently. And that's one of the theories that like kind of says we have this and animals don't, and we've evolved to have this, and that's what makes us like thrive as a species. So there was a point there that linked back to your original point. I just can't remember it.
Yeah, no, I was just what you were saying about purpose.
Yeah,
you kind of need a consciousness in order to have that, and then how important a purpose is to someone's happiness. Of course, that's undoubtedly very high. That's a variable that we could not know for sure, but we can certainly say it's definitely human, and it's really important. You're right.
So if we. Oh,
Rachel,
sorry,
what is the purpose of life then?
Yeah.
Well, actually, Aristotle thought that the purpose of life was to find happiness and to live a happy life. And I'd say I kind of agree. I kind of like that.
Wrong, it's 42.
Oh, I like that I get that reference. I don't feel dumb for once. What is quite interesting is, and I kind of want your take on this, apparently Aristotle thought that happiness was the ultimate value of your life as lived up to this moment. So it's measuring how well you've lived up to your full potential as a human being. It's the final goal of life. However, he also argued that you couldn't really know if you've lived a happy life until after it was over or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
yeah.
How can you know anything once it's over?
he must have the assumption that the consciousness goes on. I think he did as well.
Yeah.
So like, that's when you can,
So the argument that kind of like a lot of people kind of bring into this is that you can't say whether a football match was good or not until the match is finished. It's kind of like you can't say you've lived a happy life until it's over.
Yeah.
It's like a movie that's amazing, and then the ending is just like bleh.
Yeah.
Or like some of those movies that like it's absolutely horrible, but then the ending is just blows your mind and makes the whole thing worth it.
And for me, I still don't buy that reasoning, because let's just say the game is crap. So, it's just a bad game. Everyone got injured. All the replacements happened. Whatever sport we're talking about. You can get towards 90% of it being done, and someone can say, hey, you need to listen to the next 10%, watch the next 10% in order to be able to say that it was a bad game. No, you don't.
Yeah.
You really don't at that point. It's a bit like when someone says the Bible is flawless, and you find a flaw, and then if they was to come back and say, no, you need to read the whole Bible. No, I don't. I found a premise that's wrong. Game over.
Yeah.
But sometimes there's sports matches where like in the last like 2 minutes there's this massive upset, and it's like the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, but can it outweigh 90% of people basically not playing the game right and punching each other?
I will say that should be incentive for people who are towards the end of their life to, if they're evaluating it, saying, you know what, my life has been crap so far, to suddenly like give it that last surge and make that last little bit amazing.
Or if you take my philosophy, it's terrible. Just get it over with.
Because it's like that's almost like it's a sunk cost. It's like the last 90%. People oftentimes they'll do this. They'll, in terms of like religious thinking, they'll say, well, I'm not gonna leave my faith because then I would have just wasted the last 90% of my life. Well, it's like, well, are you gonna waste the next 10%? Like that last 90% is already done. Now you have an opportunity for the next however many years you have left. That's all you have right now. Like the rest of it is gone. It's sunk. Don't think in terms of what you've done for the last bit of your life. Think in terms of like, what can you do for the next bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of want to scream this to my parents too, because they both smoked since they were 15, and they're in their like late 50s now. And my entire life, my mum's been like, oh, it's too late for me now to stop. Like, I've been smoking long enough, the damage is done. And I'm like, no, I mean, yeah, damage is done, but you can stop at any time. And like, why wouldn't you? If she'd stopped 10 years ago when I first brought this point up, she would have had 10 healthier years than she's had now. And I just feel like this idea of like, oh, it's too late now, is just a cop-out, and it's just lazy, and it's just out of fear or laziness or whatever. And I think people need to man up a bit.
Was it Bill Hicks that when confronted about smoking, someone said like, it'll take 10 years off your life, and he's like, well, those are the bad years anyways. But it's kind of funny on the like when just at face value, but then you start to think about it and you're like, no, it actually just brings those bad years closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're shaving off 10 good years and then bringing the shit years in sooner.
And it's not even that. This is all just assuming, of course, that you're going to get got by it. It could be that if your mum stopped now, she may get another 6 or 7 years because she dies from ischemic heart disease rather than lung cancer, which is seriously more painful and hard for everybody to see. And those 7 years could mean that she's there for her grandchildren. That she can have an influence and be remembered and to really make a big difference in their lives. But instead,
or not just that. In in the last episode we talked about, can we put an end to aging? And even if we don't live forever, what if she's able to live 10 years longer by quitting smoking now? And that then in that 10 year, maybe 9 years from now, there's some massive breakthrough in organ transplants and she's able to get 2 new clean lungs.
Yep.
Yeah.
It might even be in vitro. So it's just they take their DNA and build it in a lab. This isn't beyond possible.
Yeah. See, I hope this is an episode you're listening to, Mom.
To basically just put a full stop on what you were saying there, Thomas, is that we were discussing the best way to stop a disease is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And so we know that smoking's bad for you if you can't stop it. For Rachel's sake and Rachel's children in the future, or Kyra.
And all right, so to get back to the whole happiness thing, let's have a look at the history of happiness and how and when it was studied. So we're going to go way, way back to Socrates in sort of like 400-ish BC and around that time. And he thought that you could gain rational control over your desires and harmonize different parts of the soul to produce a divine-like state of inner tranquility that the external world could not affect. Apparently that is happiness. So he thought it was all about inner tranquility and inner peace. He also thought that if you lived a moral life, you lived a happier life. So by doing good things and doing good things for other people, you would be happier. And the more good you were, the happier you were. He also, just to sum up his little bit, thought that happiness was an unconditional good and always the end goal of our activities. And he also thought, I feel like I'm just listing things off here, but he also thought that happiness does not depend on external things, but it can be influenced by external things because it depends on how you use them. For example, money doesn't make you happy, but how you use money makes you happy. Food doesn't make you happy, but what you choose to eat and when you choose to eat it makes you happy. Any thoughts on that?
Socrates was a smart man.
He was.
Yeah, I think as far as happiness goes, everything I've learned, all of my experience in life, all of the people I've met who have suffered bad situations and people that have just had good situations, everything tells me it's about the way in which people look at the world. It's to do with your attitude. It's to do with the way in which you interpret things. You know, you've got that whole, is the glass half full or half empty? And it kind of comes down to that if you want to make it really basic. And I think Socrates falls on the side of saying the glass is half full. But it's all about your mentality. It's the way in which you look at things. So an example would be, I went up to my friend the other day and I was saying, you know, my YouTube's doing great. It's increased and, you know, I'm going to be collaborating with this person and my relationship's great. And he was just basically annoyed. And he said, your life just always goes good. And I thought about it and I went, well, actually, no, it's just that's what I focus on. How I haven't told you, I've been with you for 2 hours. I haven't told you that I found my bike down the end of my road like 2 days ago and it's been vandalized and I have to pay out for it. I haven't told you that I got a speeding ticket the last time I went to London. I haven't told you X, Y, and Z. And it's not because I was hiding it. It's because I've trained myself so that I focus on what's in control, what makes me happy. And so it's very much a mentality thing. I know lots of people that would only focus on the negative. That's all they would do. And then they would say, oh, you're lucky. And it's like, pay attention. I'm not. You're just, it's your mentality. It's your attitude. Fix
so
it.
Much of it takes practice, like practicing being in a state of contentment and not just stressing about all of the negative. Because it's like the difference in the mindset between the optimist and the pessimist. And it's like if you put, you know, the optimist if you put a pessimist in a room full of toys, they're going to start crying because they have no one to play with. But if you put an optimist in a room full of shit, they're going to start swimming through the horse crap looking for the pony. You know, it's so much of it is in how we think. And if you're fundamentally a negative person and you're always discontent, then you're always going to be looking for the next rush, the next like, oh, if only I could buy this, I'll be happy. And then you find that like you can't buy happiness. You can rent it. You can rent happiness briefly, but then it'll wear out quick, and then you're left exactly back where you started in this state of, well, if I only had this, then I'd be happy. It's like, no, you got to be happy first, and then when you have the things, then you'll find that you're, you know, content with them.
You know, they've done that with millionaires, people that won the lottery. They've tracked their happiness essentially, and it peaks immediately, but it always goes back down because it's a mentality thing. It's not about money. Money's very useful. Like if you're someone that struggles, when you finally don't actually have to worry whether or not you can pay for a meal to be able to hang out with your friends, I can actually go to the cinema and watch this film. I don't have to worry and count my money. It's a huge, huge difference. But once you go past that barrier, honestly, the stats show that it doesn't matter how much money you make, it really, really plateaus. Especially after you've got to a point where you can afford regular holidays and you basically want for nothing other than you can't have a mansion. And at that point,
in the
it's
US,
it's done.
There was a study that found that up to about $70,000, depending on the state, you know, obviously there's different levels of, you know, what's the term I'm looking for, where you can you have the purchasing power parity, where depending on how much money or how far your dollar can go, how much you can buy in a different particular state, it's around give or take $70,000 a few years ago. They found that past that point, you experience diminishing returns in as far as happiness goes.
I can believe
so.
Yeah.
You can, purchase healthcare and you don't have to worry about your health. Once you, can buy all the, food and housing, for yourself and for your kids. Also, depending on how many kids you have, that number will vary. But once you have all your basic needs taken care of and, you don't want for anything, then getting that extra private jet, it's not going to do a whole lot for you in terms of long-term happiness.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say about that ties very well into Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
You have the shelter and you have all those things at the bottom that you need. But the self-actualization, the things that come higher, it's all to do with mentality. It's all to do with happiness.
Otherwise, every single billionaire on Earth would be like Steve Ballmer, and they'd just be like, like going crazy, like super excited all the time.
The quote which you just said, very eloquent quote actually, about wading through shit to find a pony. Was that Epicurus, right? Yeah? Is that
Speaking of him, let's actually no, we'll talk about Aristotle first, because he said a lot of the same things as Socrates. But he also kind of spoke about how happiness is this final goal. It's not just something that can be won or lost in an hour. So what you were talking about before about how you can rent happiness or like for a short amount of time, it's more like you can rent joy. Happiness is something that like takes a long time to build to. You know what I mean? So he kind of noticed the difference between kind of joy and happiness.
Yeah,
see, that's weird because when I was religious, I heard the definition of joy and happiness is like the opposite. And it was like happiness is momentary, but joy is like this long-term thing.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And
that's interesting.
they defined it like this, like joy is when you put Jesus first and then others and then yourself. So it's like Joy. Whereas if you put yourself first and then others and then Jesus, you get Yodge, which doesn't do you a whole lot of good.
I'd rather have Yodge.
It's amazing. It's amazing the level of brilliant things that you get from Sunday school.
Good times.
There's a lot of science behind that one.
Clearly, you can tell. Alright, so I've got a little quiz for you guys. Based on what Aristotle said. He said, all of the following things I'm going to list contribute to achieving happiness, but one more than the others. Can you guess what he thought was the most important factor in achieving happiness?
He's an old man, probably sex.
No.
Oh.
Okay, four choices. Was it achieving all your goals in life, having a good moral character, having all the external goods you could ever ask for, or having numerous positive relationships? Which did he think was the most important factor in achieving lifelong happiness?
What does he mean by positive relationships?
Like having...
Hashtag Aristotle Gate.
I'm torn between two there.
Yeah?
The first is the moral compass, because where it's so implicit, it bleeds into everything else. But the other thing is relationships, because one thing I think the Greeks have absolutely got right is that friendship is more important than companionship. That friendship really is so important.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with friendship, but the moral compass probably might be it as well.
What was that, the other option?
Achieving all your goals in life, or having all the external goods you could want or ask for.
I'm going to go with the moral compass, because if you have an internal moral compass that you violate, then that can lead to a tremendous amount of mental torment.
Yeah.
So.
It was the good moral compass.
Woohoo!
There you go. Apparently he said that developing a good character requires a strong effort of will to do the right thing, even in difficult situations. And doing that will make you happy in the long run, apparently.
That's probably why one of the reasons he so admired Socrates, right? Even when they were going to say, you're going to drink the hemlock and get killed. He's like, nope, I'm not giving up my principles.
He was apparently like still happy right up until the end. He was like still enjoying himself, still being positive, which I think is pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, moving on a little bit to Epicurus and the whole kind of like school of hedonism and things like that. So hedonism is basically like the pursuit of pleasure, and like pleasure being the primary goal in human life, right? And so it's kind of all about trying to achieve happiness, right? However, it wasn't just about giving in to every like whim that you wanted. It wasn't just about giving in to pleasure all the time. And it was about kind of like this relationship between pleasure and pain, if that makes sense. So it was about how some things that can seem pleasurable can cause pain in the long term. And some things that seem painful now can cause happiness in the long term. And it was about kind of getting a good balance and not just giving in to everything all the time. So it was about seeking long-term pleasure. So, for example, drinking alcohol can be pleasurable in, you know, in the here and now, but when you have a hangover tomorrow morning, it causes more causes more pain overall. Similarly, like being a little bit sad and a little bit like cryy one day can seem really painful in the moment, but in the long term, it can give you more pleasure because it gives you empathy and, you know, you see the world in a different way and it makes you appreciate the happy moments a little bit more. So that was kind of one of the big points that Epicurus tried to raise in terms of like talking about happiness. But he said there was a specific technique you could use for obtaining happiness even in the most miserable of situations. And it was one of the following two. Can you guess which one? Okay, so it was either, instead of dwelling on the pain, you recollect one moment in your life that made you really, really happy, and you train your mind to relive that happy moment. So basically, you train your mind to be like happy on demand. Or was it focusing in specifically on what is causing you pain and working relentlessly to actively eliminate all causes of pain in your life so you can enjoy the good things better? Which technique do you think he promoted?
The first one.
Stephen?
I would probably go for the second one, but I think Epicurus would have went for the first.
He did go for the first, yeah. He said that he was one of the first people who thought that because I mean all the Greeks thought that we could kind of make ourselves happy, but Epicurus was one of the first people to say we can train our brains to be happy. Like, you know, so you can be miserable, you can be having the worst day, but he believed you could kind of train yourself to think back to those happy moments and get this happiness on demand and happy feelings. And I guess it kind of links now to kind of modern day CBT and mindfulness techniques, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later. But yeah, what do you think of all this and the whole like pleasure pain thing?
To just reiterate what I said earlier, really, is that for me, I just see it as pain is the thing that governs it all. And that just one of its most obvious, what am I looking for, the right word? One of its most obvious expressions is happiness. Like, I kind of see happiness to be within the subset of pain, although that's probably the wrong language to use.
Well, it depends on what type of pain. Because if it's physical, I would say, like, there are many instances in which, like, pain can be coupled with pleasure. So, obviously, you know, you have the whole sexual, like, BDSM type of, you know, self-gratifying, you know, pain. But then you also have instances of pain coupled with pride. So you'll have people who literally go through all sorts of feats of endurance, like how much pain can I take? And this goes all the way from, you know, kids in junior high that will do, you know, things to, you know, bloody knuckles and stuff like that to show off, like, oh yeah, like, and there's the sense of like, I took all this pain and I was able to endure it more than my peers. And so like you have this sense of happiness, even though you're experiencing physical pain. You know, there's this pride in accomplishment, if you will. As far as emotional pain goes, though, I think that's a bit different because
some people enjoy emotional pains for the same reasons. I know people in relationships who like feeling like their relationships are on the rocks so that they can then enjoy makeup sex or just being with that person afterwards when they fix those situations. So it's the same manifestation but just slightly different.
Well, but there's also different types of emotional pain because you have, you know, even it's like love. When you love someone deeply, it's always coupled with this slight tinge of pain, of loss, of fear of loss, of fear of losing the person, of knowing that it's ephemeral, knowing that it doesn't last forever. And so you just like, there's this inner just scream where you just want to like hold on to them and hold on to the moment, even though every single moment is gone with the next breath.
Yeah.
So there's to some extent there's that sort of like pain of like loss and sadness, but and there's pain in like watching, you know, a sad movie, but at the same time it's like there's beauty in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
so,
you know the
it's
film
not- it's-
Inside Out, the Pixar one. I think that kind of like encapsulates it well, where like you need those little bits of sadness sometimes to really kind of appreciate the happy moments.
Yeah.
You know, and how kind of like joy and sadness they learn to work together, and like yeah.
But you
Sorry,
can still be
kinda girly.
miserable, even like if you're having like the most pleasurable thing in your life, you can still
Yeah.
be miserable. Like if you're cheating on someone that you love and you have like this feeling or this mindset of like, I'm a horrible human being, or I've betrayed their trust, or I've ruined a relationship. So like you can have that feeling of negativity even when experiencing something that's physically pleasurable, or like eating the last piece of pizza and you're like, I'm gonna hate myself for this later, but it feels so good. And you know, there's these fighting emotions.
That's kind of what Epicurus was like warning against. He's like, you know, search for pleasure and stuff all you want, but don't just give into it for the sake of giving into it. For example, like cheating on your partner might be great in the moment, but long term, you're going to feel guilt, you're going to feel bad, you're going to make other people feel bad, you're going to ruin a good relationship. So it's just giving into that little bit of pleasure isn't worth it.
Are you saying that Hedonism bot from Futurama got it wrong when he said, let us cavort like the Greeks of old? You know the ones I mean.
A little bit.
That's the same Hedonism bot that said that, I trust the orgy pit has been scraped and buttered.
Aww.
You guys watch Futurama?
Yeah, Futurama's
yes.
fantastic.
Yay.
Yeah, it's great.
Oh,
So
I
much
wish it-
better than The Simpsons.
I wish it wasn't
Yes.
cancelled.
Oh, I know, right?
On the topic of what we were saying there, though, it seems like there's a contradiction. For example, saying that someone wants pain in order to have sexual pleasure. I would not see it as a contradiction. It's just this is the way principles work in general. So we say, for example, you do not lock someone behind bars. That's a principle. You just don't do it. However, there are some circumstances where that's justified.
Yeah.
The same is true of you don't want pain, you don't want psychological anguish. There's some situations where that's a good thing. And there is also this really interesting dynamic where a lot of the happiest people I know had hard upbringings, have had a harsh environment, because it is that harshity that builds them into a person that has the positive attitude that they do. So, for example, I can pick up a glass of water, and I can rather obnoxiously get excited about how much I'm enjoying it, and people around me think I'm just being disingenuous and an asshole, and I'm not. I'm really not, and I can't pinpoint why that is, but it does have something to do with having a turbulent upbringing and not having access to X, Y, and Z.
Turbulent or scarce? Because
But
I know
both.
I know people who have, and you know, myself included, like when I was a kid, things were pretty scarce. Like we didn't have a lot of extra money. Like there was always food on the table, but it was like, you know, I grew up in the former Soviet Union, and this was right at the fall of the Berlin Wall and everything. And so like there wasn't a whole lot there. Like the houses were, you know, very, very, like you close the door and the window falls out. Like it's held together by like 1 or 2 nails. You know, my mom would wash clothes in the sink and the sink would fall out in her hands, you know?
Yeah.
And so you're looking at an environment like that where things are scarce, but my parents were always very like loving and supportive. And so like, I didn't always get what I wanted as a kid, and I had to wait and I had to save up for months if I wanted to buy anything at all. But at the same time, it's so that would kind of give me this mindset of like contentment with what I have and happiness, realizing that like I'm very, very blessed, for lack of a better word. But at the same time, like I have friends who grew up, their parents were millionaires, but they were never there for them, or they treated them horribly or abused them either physically or emotionally. And their mindset on life is like they're very spoiled in a way, but also they're very, very discontent emotionally, and oftentimes have like borderline personality disorder or you know, have traumatic side effects, mental side effects from that.
That's
so
interesting.
I think there's a difference between, you know, a scarce upbringing where you don't have a lot of food or you don't have a lot of belongings, and so you make stuff work, and realizing that happiness doesn't come through possessions, versus having a an upbringing that's that has emotional scarcity. Your parents aren't there for you, or it's negative.
Well, I think this comes back to the whole thing where like happiness and stuff like that is completely individual, and there are going to be patterns where we can say like if you do X, Y, and Z, you're more likely to be happy, or if you've had this kind of upbringing, you're more likely to be happy in these circumstances. But ultimately, it's just a very individual thing, and it's down to the person, like the individual, to figure out what makes them happy and what they can do in their particular life and with their particular circumstances, what they can do to make themselves happy. Like it's a very unique thing for every person, I think.
Well, I also see a lot of people who like when they travel to places where, countries that are less well-to-do, and they see the conditions that people are living in, oftentimes that will shift people's mindset. So we used to go and volunteer at there was an orphanage it was for kids that had mental and physical disabilities, and there were oil company kids that had everything, and they would go to these orphanages, and they would see these kids that are absolutely just like happy and smiling and thrilled, even though their living situation was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. But they're just so happy to see us, and they're just playful and playing soccer, and like all they need is a soccer ball, and they're just like as happy as they've ever been. And you'd see these oil company kids come away from that and go back to these, multi-million-dollar homes, and their mindset is like shifting. And you can see it, like you can see the way that they're thinking is shifting. And they're like, how are they so happy? And yet I complain about all these little things. Like it gives you a bit of a kick in the pants.
We've always been contextual, and it's so refreshing when we finally realise that and we're reminded of it. So all of us, basically, especially everyone in a first world country, is living basically like a king compared to 300 years ago, or especially longer.
It's like I'm below the poverty line because I can only afford basic cable.
Yeah, exactly. But it comes back to what we were saying about marketing when it comes to anchoring. We anchor ourselves to those around us.
Yes.
So am I doing better than those around me? Yes, I am. Therefore, I'm affluent. Whereas the Greeks were tapping into, and happiness in general, is just tapping into forget culture, forget the context I find myself in. What is it? What does it mean to be happy? And happiness, you'll find, is more akin to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yes. I have that bottom layer covered. I have the next layer covered, and I'm developing relationships, and I'm performing right now cognitive therapy with myself to try and identify why I'm unhappy or why this is not happening. And you just get to this state where you've made it. You're content. You're very happy.
The reference point is huge, though, because you look at studies of social media use and people who are spending massive amounts of time on social media just comparing their lives to the highlights of everyone else's. You're not posting on social media that like, all of the worst parts of your life. Some people do, but most of the time the stuff that gets the likes and the hearts and therefore it gets more exposure and more views are the positive, like, oh, I just got back from a vacation in Cabo. It's not like, oh, I'm miserable because I just like took a 2-hour dump and like my intestines have all sorts of infections and stuff. Like people don't post the negative stuff as much as they post the bragging, like I'm out with friends and everything's amazing. They want their life to look enviable.
That's why I think it's really important to stop comparing yourself to other people and start comparing yourself to like past you. Like if I like sat here and was like, oh, I'm not earning as much as Dan, so, I'm a failure. Or, oh, I'm not as happy as so-and-so, so I'm a failure. Or, oh, my flat isn't as nice as this person I went to school with, so I'm a failure. Like I would be screwed and I would be miserable all the time. But instead I find it so much more helpful to think, okay, well, what kind of person was I a year ago? What kind of person was I 5 years ago? Where was I living 5 years ago? How much money did I have 5 years ago? And I compare myself that way. And because I can see myself getting better and better, because I can see myself getting happier and happier, and because I can see myself achieving more and more, like that makes me happy, and that makes me feel like I'm getting somewhere in life, and that, makes me, it makes me want to keep carrying on. Yeah.
What if people have hit like a major hurdle and their life is worse than it used to be?
Well, then I think maybe it gives them something to work back to, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know, maybe this is just me being like too much
another
of an
thing
optimist.
Another thing is that it's often yeah, you can be financially further behind than what you was before, or materialistically, but this is that sunk cost kind of thing. You have your mind and your development and what you learn and what you did with that. You're not behind at all. It's just your circumstances have changed. It's, it's just all about mentality.
A way I'd see it is that, like,
Unless you have retrograde amnesia.
Yeah.
But like, let's say you are in a worse place than you were, say, 5 years ago. Let's imagine you've lost all your money, you've lost your job, you're addicted to drugs. Like, if you can get yourself in a mentality where you can be like, well, I've had it before, I can have it again. Like, I think that's a kind of good thing to say, like, oh, I've been there at a high. What's to say I can't reach that again and better? Like, and again, I think comparing yourself to yourself.
I think it was Henry Ford that said that if he lost all of his money and lost everything, that he could have it back within 10 years, given what he knew.
Yeah.
And it was Warren Buffett. He was giving a speech at a university, and someone asked him, I don't know if I talked about this in the last episode, can you live forever? But a college student asked him, what would you, if you could give up all your money for one thing, what would it be? And he said, how old are you? And he's like, 21. He's like, I would give it all to be 21 again, knowing what I know now.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, when I quit my full-time job, I gave up a stable, steady income and, like, sort of a reliable, job. I gave all that up to do what made me happy. And, like, now I'm in a better place. Like, for a long time, I was in a worse place, sort of financially, but I was happier. And so now I'm happier and financially better off. And I'm like, I feel like taking that little dip in the beginning paid off in the long term, because it was like, like a little graph.
Yeah.
I'm drawing it out and I realize you guys can't see it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But even if it doesn't work out, like, even if like you keep trying stuff and it's failing, like, you can still have a mindset, a positive mindset of, well, at least I have my health, or at least I have food on the table, or at least I have people who love me. Like, there's always something that if you think of it in terms of, like, if I were to lose this and then get it back, maybe you hate your job right now, but if you were to lose it and then go unemployed for 6 months and then get your job back, you'd probably be absolutely thrilled to have it.
Yeah.
But the only thing that shifted, it wasn't the job. It was, what you have now versus what you have 6 months from now. Like, it's not the job, it's the mindset about the job.
Yeah. All right. So before this kind of like goes on too long, I want to talk about one last thing, which is this guy called Martin Seligman and his work in this idea of positive psychology. And positive psychology is basically the study of the things that make life worth living. So we're not talking about like any kind of like mental illnesses. We're not talking about the bad stuff. We're not talking about fixing trauma. We're talking about making life better and how do we make life worth living. And I think it's a really kind of nice outlook on things, because it's work that you can do with any person, regardless of whether they've had bad stuff happen in the past or whether they're just an average person or whatever. So it's all about how we get to make ourselves better. It's all about making ourselves better people, happier people, and it's about figuring out what we want in life and how to get there, which I think is really, really cool. So he conducted a study that found that apparently the most satisfied, upbeat people were those who had discovered and exploited their unique combination of signature strengths, which included everything from like persistence and temperance and things like that. And so it was kind of like, once people discovered what made them unique and what their strengths were and what they were good at, once they kind of discovered their purpose in life, people were happier in general. Does that make sense? So he came up with these like 3 dimensions to happiness that he thought needed to be cultivated in every person. And these were the pleasant life, which were things like, which he called savoring and appreciating basic pleasures like companionship, the natural environment, and our bodily needs. He said the second kind of dimension of happiness was what he called the good life, which was about discovering our unique virtues and strengths and employing them creatively to enhance our lives. And then the third dimension of happiness was about the meaningful life, was what he called the meaningful life. And this was about finding a deep sense of fulfillment by employing our unique strengths for a purpose greater than ourselves. So basically, these 3 dimensions of happiness were about fulfilling our needs, were about kind of finding our strengths and making ourselves better people. And then the third one was about helping other people. So they were like what made up a happy person. What do you think of that? I know there was kind of like a lot of talking at you there.
For me, it was another description, a correlation with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, really.
So you're putting others first and then yourself. Where does Jesus come in? Because if you put him last, it's still only oij.
Oij, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Now that I've thoroughly derailed the conversation, what was the question again, Rachel?
So what do you think of these like 3 dimensions of happiness, where like to be happy you need to fulfill your own needs, you have to work on improving yourself, and then you have to use those skills to help other people? Do you think like you need to do all 3 to be happy? So like, let's imagine you're living a life where you fulfilled that pleasant life. You know, you've got a good house, good job, you're earning a steady income, you have food on the table, you're happy in that respect. And then, you know, you're living the good life too. So you have some hobbies, you're taking some courses, you're working to improve yourself, you've got a good education under you, you're feeling like a good person, you're feeling like you're always been a good person. But you're not living the meaningful life. You're not doing anything to actively help other people. Do you think you can never reach kind of like true happiness without that?
I think some people can.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do. And I think for some people, it's not going to be about people. It's going to be about helping the world, helping other species.
Yeah. Well, that's,
we
still,
were saying,
you know, a purpose greater than ourselves.
Yeah. So it's the emphasis on helping people, which I was just slightly intrigued with there. I think that was just kind of like a slip from me, like equating it to people. Or it's just me reading into it.
No, it's okay. Like it could, like you say, be helping animals, helping the environment. It could even just be like being an academic and writing books.
I see. So do you mean by helping people, you mean just having a purpose? Yeah, I think purpose is really, really important, and I'd say it is in that case paramount. And they're not separate; they fall into one another. But yeah, purpose is huge, and it kind of, we're all going to have similar purposes to a large extent, but finding your own is going to take some cognitive therapy, and it's hard to identify, and it might change as well depending on how your life goes. But yeah, I think purpose is really, really important, and just feeling like you're part of something is super important as well.
I would say that we need to satisfy all 3, but there's varying degrees to which different people need to satisfy each one, because we're all wired differently. So, for example, if someone is a psychopath and, you know, let's say that they have a shrunken amygdala, or the connections between the amygdala and the rest of their brain are don't function as well as they should, then they're not necessarily going to derive happiness from helping others or from making others happy as much as someone who is better equipped to be empathetic and to feel, you know, those emotions. It would be similar too with someone who perhaps derives pleasure from pain, you know, from personal pain, or like there's going to be different variations on this scale. But I do think that you need all 3, and that maybe you derive happiness from, you know, the pleasant life in a different way than someone else would.
Yeah.
But I do think that you would need to satisfy it. That's
kind of interesting. Like this kind of like brings me back to a conversation me and Dan were having the other night, because like we were just talking and we were both like, we're really content right now. Like this is really good. And we were just kind of like having a chat about things. I was like, this is the first time in my life where I'm not waiting for something else to happen. So like for a long time I was always like, when I was at school I was like, I can't wait till I get to 6th form and I'm out of this place. When I was at 6th form I was like, I can't wait till I get to uni and I'm out of this place. And then at uni I was like, oh, I can't wait to do my year out and start working. And then when I was working I was like, I can't wait to go back to uni and just graduate. And then I can't wait to graduate. And then when I started working at Peppersmith I was like, I can't wait to get out of here. I hate it. And now and Dan was kind of the same, you know, he was like, oh, I can't wait to go to uni, I can't wait to graduate, I can't wait to start working. And now we're kind of like both at this point where we don't necessarily, we're not waiting for something else. That's not to say
sorry, Clayton, I was just going to say, are you on the property ladder?
We're renting now.
See, this is the reason I mention that is because it's a mentality switch, isn't it? Because you could have just moved the goalpost to, oh, we're waiting until we've done that, and then we're waiting until we've had kids, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But
No,
the fact that you both haven't moved the goalpost again, because people do this, they move.
Yeah.
I've done it. You move the
Yeah.
goalpost rather than, celebrating it. That suggests that you figured out, what the Greeks were saying, and that is it's a mentality thing.
Because we're saying, like, we're not just stagnating, like, because obviously, like, my YouTube channel is growing all the time, I'm earning more and more money all the time, I'm doing new projects all the time at work, he's getting promotions every year, he's building his team, he's now got an intern that's going to start working for him and stuff, so he's going somewhere, like, we have goals in mind, so we're like, oh, eventually we want to get married, we've just got a dog, so things are changing, but we don't feel like we're waiting for something to happen to be happy anymore. We're just enjoying what we have, and it feels really nice, and it's really kind of freeing,
Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
not trying to
Like,
keep up with the Joneses.
Exactly, yeah.
And another
it's-
thing
it's
is, I
great.
guess, the things where you're saying until this happens, this happens, it might be worth looking at whether or not those things fall under the first layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because then it would explain why they had such emphasis. They're requirements, they're not luxuries. Whereas once you've got the requirements, if you've just got the bare minimum, or you've just got a situation where you're comfortable and all of your other aspirations and all of the other possibilities, you want them, you're striding towards them, but they're not necessary for you to be happy, you've won.
Yeah.
And then when you do achieve them, you take a moment and kind of a mindful moment where you realize, like, this really is wonderful. Like, I really am grateful for this. Like, practicing gratitude every day, thinking about, like, what am I grateful for? What are the
And that
the
leads me
positive
on to my
things in
next
life?
topic. Sorry, next up I want to talk about mindfulness. And you kind of led me in there. Sorry to interrupt.
Sweet.
Sorry, I got really excited
for
about that.
That was good.
So the final thing I want to touch on today before this podcast gets too long is the idea of, can we train ourselves to be happy? And a big kind of technique in training ourselves to be happy is mindfulness. And mindfulness is kind of everywhere at the minute. You'll see mindfulness apps, mindfulness books, mindfulness YouTube channels, mindfulness podcasts. And it seems like a big buzzword, and it sounds a lot like pseudoscience, but it's actually something that I really, really believe in, and something that I actually really like, and something that I practice myself. So you guys probably already know this, but mindfulness is all about kind of achieving this calm, happy mental state by focusing completely on, like, the present moment. And you focus on the things around you, what you can see, what you can smell, what you can feel, but also it helps you slow down your thoughts and figure out what's going on in your head. So for me, I kind of started using it, like, whenever I was, like, feeling a panic attack or an anxiety, kind of like my anxiety building. And so taking the time to stop my thoughts and kind of just focus on what is happening in the here and now, it stopped my thoughts racing too much. It stopped me overthinking things. It stopped me getting panicky. And it's something that really, really works for me, because it kind of takes me out of my overhyped emotional state and brings me back to my logical, rational brain, which means overall I'm happier. And so it is a technique that people can use kind of to make themselves happier. I was just wondering if you guys have any thoughts on it, or if you do think it is a little bit pseudoscience-y.
No, I think oftentimes people say mindfulness. There's a large aspect of it is equivocable with being self-aware.
Yes.
And when you're aware of your feelings and your emotions and your mindset, then you're able to draw out a lot of the irrationality that we come packaged with.
Yeah.
And you shift from this just instant emotional reactive state where I think is it Kahneman and Kaspersky that wrote Thinking Fast and Slow?
Oh, I know who you mean.
Where
I can't
you
remember
have
who
these
wrote the book, though.
kind of the more rational brain that, like, stops and takes a moment and thinks about stuff and thinks rationally, and then you have the quick reptilian brain, if you will, like, that it's the brain stem that just fires emotionally and quickly. And if we shift to a mindset where we stop and we really take a moment to slow down and think about what we're feeling, then a lot of the irrational emotions and responses to our day that are causing us a lot of stress and pain and frustration, we can address them, and we can help ourselves to really think, why am I feeling this? Is this really that big of a deal? Is this really something in the long scheme of things that's going to be negative? What is the worst that's going to happen? How likely is it that that's actually going to happen? And what do I have to be grateful for? How am I better off than those around me that are in, that have stuff that I don't?
Yeah.
What do I have to be grateful for? And when we really stop and we think about that, then, we're able to kind of reset our mindset and reset our happiness levels rationally rather than emotionally.
I think a big chunk of it is like living in the present as well. So like for a long time when I was unhappy, I spent a lot of time thinking about what ifs and like what if this happens and what if this happens and what if this happens, and a lot of time thinking about, oh, this was a bad thing that happened in the past and this was a stupid thing that I did, and I spent too long focusing on those two areas and not enough about what was happening in the here and now. I think focusing on the present really helps you kind of take stock of where you are, and like you say, Thomas, being grateful for what you have, and I think that can lead to happiness.
Yeah, gratitude is huge. I don't think it has to be just a focus on the present, because oftentimes, like when I'm in a mindful state, I'll think of like, because I'll get up and have like a morning routine, and oftentimes I'll meditate, and I don't just like, I think of things that I'm grateful for. So like I like to start my day off with a 10 things, gratitude, like that I'm grateful that I have. And then you're much more appreciative for the rest of the day. You get started with that right mindset. But I also like to sometimes think about like, where am I going? And like, what is my plan to get there? What steps am I going to take? So it doesn't have to be like this long, intense thought process. Sometimes it's just kind of sitting there and letting your mind empty and just being aware of like your present feelings and sensations and, your current, that can be a mindful state. But also like, you take all of your worries and all of your anxiety and all of your fears and you think like, are these actually rational? And how can I overcome them? Like, what are the rational steps that I can take to kind of lay out a plan? And like, what am I going to do right now? Like put one foot in front of the other. What is my plan for the day? And I think that is kind of a way to be mindful of the future and the steps that we take rather than just emotionally reacting to the things that come our way.
You know what you were saying about, do I see it as a pseudoscience? I kind of view it the same way that I view chiropractors. Okay. So the element which is about physical therapy is physical therapy. It's a science. There is manipulations you can do to the spine that is going to help alleviate pressures and even put ribs back in, etc. But they attach on top of it assertions that are fucking nonsense. And in chiropractic, there's some nonsense as well.
Did you say put ribs back in?
Yeah, sorry, pop ribs back in. So if you like, have a rib like come out the back, not out the skin, but just it happens a lot. People can get up or just be in bed and breathe awkwardly or cough, and one of their ribs can pop out.
I've heard of like spine alignments. I've never heard of your rib just popping out.
Essentially
really
it dislocates. Yeah, basically dislocates, and it can be very uncomfortable. I get it. It's really unfortunate, but you can put it back in by doing the right thing. It's a bit like
your
someone
rib.
that's the back on my back. One of the ribs dislocates quite frequently, and I did it because of a horrible injury when I was younger.
I mean, one of your spinal discs.
Not one of the discs. You've got the back ribs.
Yeah. Wait.
I'm hoping I'm using the right term here. Let me get the right term.
I'm holding my ribs here. I feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah. They call it subluxation, a partial dislocation of the back rib. But yeah, a lot of people get it, and you can just use physiotherapy to put it back in. You know how some people have problems with their knees where it just dislocates, and you can just, with a bit of physiotherapy, put it back in.
Isn't that your vertebra, not your ribs? Like I'm looking it up right now. It says a slight misalignment of the vertebra.
To be honest with you, I don't know. So you might very much be right.
Because your rib is, like your rib cage is in your front.
Yeah, so people get it in the front, of course, with the rib. When referring to the back, I must be referring to what you were saying there, the vertebra.
the vertebra misaligning.
My bad.
No worries.
Still makes me feel weird.
Both of which you can get dislocations in the rib as well, and physiotherapy will fix it. But anyway, the reason I just brought that up is because chiropractic, they use the techniques to be able to put things back and whatnot, but they conflate it with pseudoscientific claims and nonsense. And I think that meditation has unfortunately been basically only spoken about in a religious context,
Yeah.
and so therefore we have those problems. Whereas if you have push forwards with like Sam Harris's book, Searching for Spirituality Without Religion, you know, he talks about the fact that there's a lot to be said about it. To a large extent,
the same as waking up.
Yeah, exactly. So meditation, like the way in which some people pray, is basically CBT. You're reflecting on things.
Yeah.
And people falsely say, okay, the power of this has come from the fact that I prayed, or from the fact that energy is all around us, or whatever nonsense, when really there is value to be had there, but we need to focus on that and dissect it from the nonsense. Similar to how we've done in many other areas of where religion fails.
Well, and that's true with like the Eastern mysticism, and like, you know, sometimes if you do like yoga sessions at places, you know, kind of Eastern wellness centers and stuff, they'll talk about like, you know, focus your chi energy and align your chakras and yada yada, and it's that's all pseudoscientific bullshit.
Yeah.
Yep.
But what they're experiencing is this state of, you know, they're stretching. Oftentimes there's fresh air. It's like the morning time. They're getting sunshine, or they're outdoors. They're in a very quiet, peaceful place. Oftentimes there's music that's calming. They're able to kind of step away from the stress of the day. They're focusing, and there is this mindfulness aspect that really does affect us positively. But while that's scientific, they're coupling that and explaining it and layering on top of it all these layers of spiritual gobbledygook and supernatural gobbledygook.
My mother-in-law does this all the time. She's
it does
like,
it a lot of injustice.
Yeah, she's always like, oh, you need to take your shoes off and feel the ground and be grounded with the earth. And I'm like, or you could just enjoy being outside with fresh air and take a moment to appreciate where you are. Same thing.
And it's like, it might feel good to take your shoes off. It might feel good to let them breathe, and, you know, not literally breathe, but, you know, let the cold air wash over them, and, you know, feel, you know, close to nature and stuff. But it's not that the Earth's energy is oozing through you.
Yeah,
you know?
You're just taking a moment to appreciate where you are, and there's a biological benefit from that, you know? Just, Anyway, last kind of thing I want to like kind of talk about is just do you guys have any other ideas about how you can live your happiest life? How do you think we can encourage other people to be happy?
Just before I throw that in, I was just having a quick Google. Evidently, we do have back ribs, but maybe that's just it's just a different word for use for different things.
It's the rib cage, isn't it? So they go
it's
round.
not just the chest. It is the back rib. So it is a back rib that comes out, not the sternum for me.
Ooh, gross.
As an atheist, I like to eat baby back ribs.
Nice.
Which is what gives me happiness.
Was you saying tips for happiness?
Yeah, basically, like, imagine we had to come up with like a formula or a way of being happy, or a method for happiness. Like, what tips and ideas would you guys throw out?
Go to
Hookers
YouTube.
and blow. No, don't do that. I was just quoting Bender.
No, it's blackjack and hookers.
Oh, blackjack and hookers.
Blackjack and hookers.
What is the hookers and blow from?
I don't know, but it sounds familiar.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. Bender's definitely blackjack and hookers, though.
Yeah.
Go to YouTube and Google and type into it Arnold Schwarzenegger. I nearly said go to YouTube and Google it, but go to YouTube and Google Arnold Schwarzenegger rules for life. They're very, very good. I think he tapped into something really important, and one of them, for example,
in the show notes.
Yeah. So one of them was don't be afraid to fail. So many people, especially young people, are petrified of failing, and they don't quite really realize that you only fail when you stop. Otherwise, it's just a path. You fail forward until you succeed. Failure only happens when you stop. And so if you are afraid to fail and you don't want to take the risk of trying something that you really want to do, not only
failed.
you have exactly it's over.
Sorry.
No, you're right. That's exactly what it is. But yeah, I'd recommend checking out what he said. I remember when I was younger, I found it very inspirational.
That sounds great.
It's like there's no such thing as failure. There's just negative feedback.
Oh, I like that. That's quite good.
I think that there was a study or a survey of like, I forget how many multimillionaires who had made it before 35. And they found that the average one of them had it like 5 to 10 failed startup attempts before they hit on one success.
Yep. They're not afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard about that.
But a lot of times, like people who don't, maybe they start 1 or 2 and then they quit too early.
I found, I think I've said before to you guys that I know a few millionaires. I used to work with them.
Just throwing that out there.
Just throwing it out there.
I know some millionaires, you know.
Yeah, my connections.
All of them have very similar mentality, and none of them are scared of failing, and they don't give a shit what other people think.
Yeah.
So one of the points that I found quite interesting in Paul Dolan's book, Happiness by Design, was where he said, don't try too hard to be happy. Like, so don't feel like you have to force it too much. Like, don't try and like, you know when people say like, oh, like, I'm going to go to all these events and I'm going to do all these things. It's like, sometimes you just need to just live your life and just go with the flow and just like enjoy what you have. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, while you're speaking, I thought of something not quite as relevant, but I was just thinking the best tip for being happy is know thyself. If you know yourself, then...
That's kind of mindfulness.
It is. Yeah. Minus the woo-woo.
Well, but mindfulness isn't woo. Like, oftentimes meditation is coupled with woo. Especially the transcendental type.
Yeah.
I mean,
mindfulness, I do think of more on the CBT side of things, though.
Mindfulness is just being self-aware.
Yeah.
At least to me.
Yeah, it's been, like, in the UK, or all I can say, in my experience, mindfulness is used by people who are spiritual a lot.
Oftentimes you'll see, like, a mindfulness center or something, and they'll couple it with, you know, the woo.
Yeah. I've only ever had it, like, recommended to me by cognitive behavioral therapists, so...
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess I've only ever kind of been like I was introduced to it from the science psychology side of things.
Yeah.
Which is why I guess I like it, and I'm quite good at filtering out the woo.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, it is really important. And if you're getting it recommended by you know cognitive therapists, that's good because you know cognitive therapy is very, very successful, and they're going to know what they're talking about.
Yes.
I will say I don't want to add too much more because Rachel is having to upload this or edit this episode, and it's like already getting long.
We're going to need to wrap up soon.
But yeah, absolutely, I would say know thyself.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end this. Actually, my last question to you guys is: are you happy?
Very much so. Happier than I've ever been.
Aww, I love that. Aww.
Yeah, I'm always striving towards something big and world changing, but I do say in the moment I tend to be pretty content with life.
I like that.
Cool. And Rachel, repeat what you said earlier. Are you happy?
Oh, I'm happy. I think like you, I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm happier than I thought I could be at this point in my life as well.
Cheers to that.
It's all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
It is. It's the blackjack and hookers.
It's like don't do school, stay in drugs.
Please don't follow that advice.
I reckon we should cut the episode before you said don't take the advice.
And on that note, we don't have a tagline.
We don't have a tagline.
This has been an absolute blast, and now we want you to join in the conversation over on the Here and How Facebook and Twitter pages, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram if you just want some of the dankest of sciencey memes. If you like one of our particular styles, check out each of our YouTube channels: Rachel Oates, Rationality Rules by Stephen Woodford, and Holy Kool-Aid by me, Thomas Westbrook. To find all of our episodes, show notes, contact information, and more, warp on over to our home base, thehereandhow.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want us to succeed in spreading the love of science, you can help us out by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And to all our friends and family listening, thank you for spending this episode with us. We'll be back to explore another exciting big idea next week. Now go create something magnificent.